They wouldn't let me have a fire up here, so this is the best we're going to do. Fireside chats got their origination from FDR. FDR was a president of the United States in a very difficult time, and there was a disconnect between he and the people and a lot of questions. This was before TV, before social media, so he took to the radio and did these fireside chats from 1933 to 1944, and he did 30 of them. Talking at first, it was a lot about coming out of the Great Depression, and then it was navigating into a world war. There was lots to talk about, and he talked about it in a calm, personal way to try and connect with them. When you hear the word fireside chats, that's one of the first things that comes to mind. I'm pretty sure he got the idea, though, from Chris Beard at Texas Tech basketball, because Chris Beard has done these fireside chats on a fire that looks more like something on here, but it's done a great job of connecting with Tech students and Red Raider Nation and letting them know about, hey, here's what's going on with Tech basketball. Here's what's coming up next. Hey, here's a great restaurant to try in town you may never have tried. Here's relationship advice, Tech students. I mean, he covers it all. And so he uses this idea of fireside chats, and I'm pretty sure he got the idea from Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But both of them weren't the first fireside chats. Neither of them were. Fireside chats go all the way back to the Bible. The Bible is actually full of fireside chats, and we're going to look at a real famous one today. But in this series, what we're going to do is we're going to look at several fireside chats that happen in the Bible and see what could that teach us about connecting with God and building a faith like a roaring fire. The Bible also uses the imagery of fire a lot. And there's a lot we can learn from it. So if you have a Bible, turn to Exodus chapter 3. The background of this story also can be found in Acts 7. But in Exodus 3, Moses has been living with his father-in-law. Look what it says. Now, so there's telling you something led up to this. So everything before this led up to this. Now, Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law. So this is telling us something about Moses. Something happened before. He had a bad incident with an Egyptian. He killed him. Like did not like the Israelites being oppressed. He was living as an Egyptian, even though he was an Israelite. He saw an Egyptian mistreating an Israelite. He killed him. Bad idea, bad execution, literally. So he runs. He does what a lot of us do when we make a mistake. He runs. And Acts 7 tells us it was 40 years he was living. And he's living with his father-in-law. I mean, he's sunk pretty far, right? Like, I'm just kidding. Like, he's living with his father-in-law. Hey, if you live with your father-in-law, more power to you. Jethro was his father-in-law. He was living with him, and he was tending the flock. There's actually, shepherds were not very well thought of, and they were usually kind of a second-class citizen, and his father-in-law was actually a priest who worshiped pagan gods. Like, Moses feels like he's so far off the map from where he used to be. And if you've ever feel like I feel lost or I feel alone or I feel like I've wandered too far or maybe God's wandered or life has gotten too crazy, like something happens in Moses' life that can give us hope, and it teaches us something about how to hear from God. Moses is tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. The reason you want to know that, if you have a Bible, you might even circle Horeb, or if you're watching on or taking notes on your phone, you could maybe just circle it with a Sharpie. I guess that's how it works. But you could circle it there and don't circle it with your Sharpie. That's a bad idea. So Horeb is actually the place where later Moses would come back, and we would know it as Mount Sinai, where Moses would receive the 10 Commandments. And God even promises, hey, one day, we're going to meet up here again. And I'm going to give you, there's going to be something significant. Like, this becomes a very significant place. Here's what it says in verse 2. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. It's the burning bush. This is such a familiar, how many of you have ever heard this story before? Raise your hands if you've ever heard it. Here's the problem when something's familiar. A lot of hands went up here. If you raised your hand online, I didn't see it, but you can comment if you've heard it before, if you've read it before. The problem is when something's familiar, we tend to dismiss it. We think, oh, I know the story already. But there might be something here for you. Something specific about how do you hear from God. And Moses has this encounter with God where God appears to him in the flames of fire. And if you want to get a guy's attention, just set something on fire. We'll pull over, we'll look, we'll watch it on YouTube. Like fire it gets our attention, right? So he knew how to get Moses' attention. Moses sees that the bush is on fire, but it wasn't burning up. So that's even more like what is this? So Moses thinks, I'll go over and see. And so Moses says, all of a sudden, this is what you want to do. If you want to hear from God, I'll give you one word. Here's what you need to do. Do what Moses did. Look. Just go through eyes looking. But you can go, like, I'm a curious person. I'm an observer. I like making observations. I looking in a very specific way. Look with holy curiosity. If God is omnipresent, if God is everywhere, and we've talked in multiple weeks in the last 6 months that God is always at work, why wouldn't we go through life looking with holy curiosity and seeing where God is working, seeing what God is doing? Moses did that, and it goes well for him. Verse 4, when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God sees that Moses takes a step in his direction. And so God says, all right, I think I've got his attention. God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. Anytime somebody used their name twice, it was usually a very intimate term. And it was either like, man, I really want to have a great conversation, or, hey, Doug, we got to talk. You're in trouble. And this is not one of those you're in trouble conversations. There are other times in the Bible where God uses someone's name twice. He did it with Jacob. He said, Jacob, Jacob. Jesus said it to Martha, Martha, Martha. Like there's these times where saying a name twice means there's something here I want to connect about. And usually it means I'm about to elevate something. Elevate your position. I'm going to elevate your thinking. I want to do something right now. I want to move you to a different understanding and maybe a different action. And when Moses is looking with holy curiosity, he understands that something is going on and God's in the middle of it. And he calls his name. And so Moses responds and says, here I am. I believe God is always trying to get your attention. And if we think about, I guess God was trying to get my attention, we usually think it's through something negative. I don't think it's positive. I think it's all things. I think God is going to use anything and everything to get our attention. And here, he was speaking Moses' language. I'm going to set a bush on fire and it won't burn. And it got Moses' attention. But then what kept his attention when he recognized God was speaking to him. God is always trying to get your attention, so look. C.S. Lewis has this great quote. We must look and go on looking until we see all that there is. Just like this passage might be familiar to you. You've read it before. Look and keep on looking until you see all that God has for you there. Anything that's going on around you, look and keep on looking until you see all that God is doing there or has for you there. If you want to have a burning bush encounter with God, start just by looking with holy curiosity. But then Moses didn't just look, he listened with holy curiosity. He said, here I am. God, I'm listening. You've got my attention. And what I love is he didn't say, here I am. Why isn't that bush burning up? He doesn't not even thinking about the fire or the burning bush that's not burning up. He just says, God, here I am. Moses kept looking and kept listening. And what you need to know is God has this encounter with Moses. God has this encounter with Moses. And you need to know that God is a God who speaks. And he speaks our language. He will connect with you. He will communicate with you. He is the best communicator of all times. Think of some of the things he's used to communicate. In your life, has God ever gotten your attention? In the Bible, God uses a burning bush. He used a talking donkey. It gives me a lot of hope as a pastor and a preacher. Like, God can use anybody and anything to communicate. God is a creative communicator, and God speaks to us. And he's not limited in the least in how or where he could speak to you. But are you looking and are you listening with holy curiosity? Years ago, I read a book by Ken Geyer called Windows of the Soul. It was in the 90s. So it's been a while since I read it. But there was a book that made a significant impact on me about this concept of looking and keep on looking and all these moments that God can connect with us. And he tells this story about a guy that went to a rabbi and said about this passage, he said, why did God speak to Moses from a thorn bush? And the guy was thinking, I would think it would be through loud thunder or lightning or a big majestic mountain somewhere. And the rabbi answered, it's to teach you that there is no place on earth where God's glory is not even a humble thorn bush. I mean, why a burning bush? I mean, it got Moses' attention. Again, fire will do that for a guy. Why then? Why there? Why that set of circumstances? And I think it was to teach Moses and to teach us, there is not a single time or place or event so earthly that God cannot speak there or speak through it. So we need to look and listen with holy curiosity. You know, that wasn't his go-to move. If I say a burning bush, you guys probably understand, if you've heard the story before, oh yeah, it's Moses in the burning bush. Because that was his unique encounter. And I believe God has unique encounters for you as well. So why don't we hear from him more? I thought about it all week. And to me, this was like, and usually when I start with a passage that we're going to teach on, I try to do what we do at Live Oak. We teach the SOAP method of scripture, observation, application, prayer, and then share it with somebody. Well, so I'm sharing it with you guys now. But my application was, I need to find a way to drown out the other voices to hear God's voice. Specifically, to hear God's voice, I must drown out all competing voices, including my own, the voices of others, and the voices of the world, as well as all the noise around me. We live in a noisy world, and we need the spiritual equivalent of noise-canceling headphones that allow us to focus in, to look and listen with holy curiosity. Because I do believe God has something to say. And he did to Moses. And this is what he had to say. Look and keep on looking until you see all that's there. And that's what Moses did. And then Moses is actually asked to take off his shoes. And if you know the story, that you understand what I mean by that. God tells him, don't come any closer. Take off your sandals. The place where you're standing is holy ground. God asked Moses to change his posture, to approach this as a holy encounter. Elizabeth Barrett Browning wrote it this way. She said this: earth is crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God. But only he who sees takes off his shoes. The rest just sit round it pluck blackberries. There are holy moments that I am convinced we walk right past. But why sandals? Why does God ask Moses to take off his sandals? Well, what he says there, and go back to the verse, it says this in verse 5. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. This is a holy encounter. God is doing something, and anytime God is speaking to you, treat it like a holy moment. But why sandals? I mean, do I have to do it with my shoes? Any kind of shoes? Or is just God doesn't get grossed out by sandals? Like, I don't know. Like why sandals? Here's the deal. So Moses, even though he was an Israelite, grew up in the palace of Pharaoh. Pharaoh had initial order to kill all the Israelite baby boys because the population of slaves of the Israelites was getting too great. He was worried about a revolt. So kill all the baby boys. Moses was spared because his parents knew that Moses was special and God was doing something, and they felt like God was wanting them to place him in a basket by the Nile, so they did. Pharaoh's daughter comes along. She adopts Moses. He grows up as an Egyptian, and then he's living in Pharaoh's palace. And if you were in the presence of Pharaoh, you took off your shoes because he was the king. And God is telling Moses, take off your shoes because I am the king. I am the King of Kings. And this is a holy encounter. Take off your shoes. I don't care if you do that with Pharaoh, but I am the King of Kings. And what Moses didn't know is he's about to go back and have an encounter with Pharaoh. And I wonder if he took off his shoes when he went back. Because he said, you're no burning bush. You're no King of Kings. This was a holy encounter, and he wanted him to treat it that way. And if you have any moment where you feel like God is speaking to you, ask yourself the question, how is my posture here? Am I looking with holy curiosity? Am I listening to God? Am I drowning out the other voices, drowning out my own voice? Because you know what's funny about when I hear from God sometimes? Boy, it sure sounds like what I wanted to hear. You know how many times I've kind of thought, that's me talking. I'm using God as a ventriloquist dummy, and I'm putting my voice into his mouth. No, it should be the other way around. I should be the one that is letting God put the words into my mouth. We have to drown out the other voices. Our voice, the voice of others, the noise around us, to get quiet, to make sure it's his voice, and then ask, am I listening with humility and submission? And what I would say about this is, you look and you learn or listen, but you need to lean in, because if somebody is talking to you that you're interested in, have you noticed how your body language changes? Have you noticed if you're watching something and they're talking but the volume's down and the kid's volume is up and there's only a remote for the TV and not the kids, and you're like, I can't quite hear and I can't find the remote. What do? You lean in to listen. If someone's about to ask you to watch any athletic event, especially hockey, watch any athletic event. When the coach is talking and the game is on the line and they call a timeout, what do the players do? They lean in to listen. And what they're saying when they do that is, I want to hear and I want to do it. If you want to have an encounter with God, be willing to lean in, to have humility and submission. Say, God, whatever it is, I'm in, I'll do it. I want to hear what you want to say. And remember that any encounter with God is holy ground. Treat it that way. Approach this week leaning into God to hear from him. Listening with holy curiosity, looking with holy curiosity. And if Moses was out in the desert, and even further out in the desert, went even further away. He'd been off kind of the radar in terms of a lot of things for 40 years. God shows up in an unexpected place. But the thing is, God shows up in expected places too. God won't just show up in the unexpected places. Spend time when you read the Bible. Understand that you could say, God, would you speak to me through this? There's a lot more encounters of history of God speaking through his scripture than there is through a burning bush. So lean in, look and listen. Drown out the competing voices. But this week, go through it, leaning in to hear from God everywhere and everything all the time. Don't miss it. And then here's what Moses heard. This was Moses' message, not yours. But there's something very similar to his story that will impact ours. The Lord says this. He goes, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. He goes, I've heard the prayers. I've seen it. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. And I am concerned. He cares. He has compassion about their suffering. I'm concerned about their suffering. Verse 8. So I have come down to rescue them. And I bet Moses is going, well, that's awesome. That is great. I'm not there anymore. I haven't been around there for 40 years, but I can't imagine it got better. I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, to bring them up out of that land. I'm not just going to rescue them. I'm going to bring them out. And I'm not just going to bring them out to, stay in a shack. No, in a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, and the Diasporites. Like all of them, all those guys, all those girls. And then Moses is like, that's awesome. And then verse 9, he says this. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me. I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. And Moses says, yes, go get them. Do it, like smite them, like thunder and lightning, and make them suffer. I can't wait to watch. I might even kind of mosey back to Egypt to see how this thing goes down from a distance. And then God says, there's no from a distance. Verse 10. So now go, I'm sending you. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Here's the dangerous thing about when you're looking to hear from God and you're listening and you're leaning in and you're saying, God, I want to hear whatever you say, Coach. Yes, let's do it. It's like we talked about it last week with Next Gen Sunday, that Jesus looks at this crowd of people that are harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And he looks at them and he has compassion on them. And then what he does after looking at the crowd that's harassed and helpless, he looks at them, but then he says, hey guys, talks to his disciples instead of them. He goes, would you pray that God sends people to help them? And they do. And you know what happens next? He sends them. You need to understand that if you say, God, I want you to do something, you will probably be an active participant in what he's going to do. God just doesn't field work orders and say, yeah, I'll take care of it. I'll get to it when I can. He's not the handyman. He's not the repairman. But he cares about you. As a matter of fact, he cares enough about you to hear your prayers, but then to send you to be a solution about this thing that's breaking your heart or that concerns you. So if you really want to have an experience where you want to hear from God this week, to have holy moments that make you want to kick off your shoes because you're like, God spoke to me here. And it was through something like I never would have imagined. If you want to have that kind of moment, be willing to do this, to leap. That if God says, I'm sending you, to say, okay. Now, Moses doesn't say, all right, I'll do it right away. The conversation goes on for a while, and he kind of says, here's why I can't, here's why I shouldn't, and gosh, I got my haircut scheduled for tomorrow. Like, I've got all this stuff going on, and there's a whole lot that goes on. But in the end, he does it. And as a matter of fact, what God is sending him into is going to be very difficult. And Moses will not be who he is later in this story as it plays out. When he goes through these difficult situations, he finds out, wow, God wasn't just using me to get something done. He was using me in this situation to do something in me. As a matter of fact, when Moses ran for 40 years and was hiding with the sheep, being a shepherd, living with his father-in-law, for 40 years, he had to care for groups of sheep. Sheep and people are a lot alike. They require a lot of care, a lot of attention. They tend to wander off. Moses was shepherding sheep before he shepherded people. But God used everything in that process to prepare him. And from this moment on, after Moses eventually says yes, he uses this as a process not just to work through Moses, but to work in Moses. And what you need to understand, if you want to have an encounter with God, it's not just a communication about information. Often it's a communication about transformation. I want to do something through you. I want to send you into this world to be part of what I'm doing. But I also want to transform you. And the process is very uncomfortable. Moses goes through many uncomfortable moments the rest of his days of leadership. But Moses was not who he was because he was being transformed. God was shaping him, and he used this process to shape him. And the process is tough. Here's how 1 Peter describes this process. In all this, in all kind of challenges and difficulties, you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. Paul was writing to people who said yes to following Jesus, and then it became illegal to follow Jesus. And Nero and the Roman Empire were arresting and killing and really mistreating and abusing Christians. And a lot of them were like, I thought if we said yes, it would get better. But the heat got turned up. These trials have come, so that the proven genuineness of your faith, which is of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. He said, everything going on in your life right now, God can use that for his good purposes in the world, but he can use it to transform you. And when the heat gets turned up, when you find yourself in the fire, and that's where Moses found himself. He's like, I said yes, and it's not going so well. It's challenging. It's difficult. God used that to refine his life. But there's this word proven, the proven genuineness of your faith. And there's two ways you can hear that. When the heat gets turned up in your life and you're having an encounter with God and you realize God's doing something in you, or you wonder, is God doing anything because I'm in a really tough situation? That word, the proven genuineness of faith, can mean two things. One, the proven, it reveals what your faith is. You want to know what your faith is? Let the heat get turned up. Because the faith that is tested is a faith that can be trusted. You understand kind of where your faith is. It's easy to have faith when you're standing kind of on the shore, but when you're out in the middle of the waves, I don't mean to mix metaphors there. It's easy to have faith when you're outside of the fire, but when you're in the fire, sometimes your faith gets burned up. But he says, it will prove the genuineness of faith. The other word that word proven means the refined. It even uses it down here, even though refined by fire. There is a process where gold is proven. It's made into something purer than it was before. We'll talk about it later in this series, that there's a process that God uses, that when the heat gets turned up, it's a process he uses to grow a faith that results in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. God gets the credit because he's the one doing it, and it does something in you. What I want to challenge you to do this week is to understand that Moses' encounter with God was unique. I doubt you'll encounter a burning bush this week. And if you do, guys, we'll go take a look with holy curiosity, and then maybe call the fire department. Like, we don't want that thing to get out of control. He probably won't do that. But even if he did, I don't think it'd be the same message. He's not going to ask you to go to Pharaoh. Pharaoh's not there anymore. Egypt's not the same. Israelites aren't the same. Like, it's all different. He will have a unique message for you, and I think he might speak in a unique way. But you have to filter it and say, God, am I truly hearing from you? Or am I being a ventriloquist and putting my message in your mouth? Am I hearing from you? So this week, don't miss these encounters. And again, here's what we talked about today. Don't miss it. Look with holy curiosity. Expect God to be working around you and be looking for it. Listen, expect God to be speaking and be listening for it. Lean in and say, God, I want to hear what you have to say. Leaning in like that last time out in a game where the players need to go out and what they do next will make an impact that will determine the outcome of a game. Lean in with that intensity. It says, God, whatever you say, I'm in. And then leap when he tells you what that is. Apply it. Put it into action. Live it out. And when the heat gets turned up, let God refine you. When the heat gets turned up, trust the process. I believe that God wants to speak with you this week. I do. And I believe he wants to work in you this week. I really do. So pay attention. And I believe God wants to work through you and send you and do something through you in this world. So lean in and listen and leap when he says leap. Say yes when he asks you to do something. Let God refine you and grow you and shape you. Because just like Moses was not who he was when he was in Egypt and he messed up and he fled, and he's not who he was when he was tending his father-in-law's sheep and he went back and led the Israelites, and he wasn't who he was when he started on day one with that job. He was being refined and grown throughout the whole way. You will not be who you are in the future compared to who you are now if you let God work in you. But you have to trust the process.